The workshop smelled of oil and heated metal, a scent Marcus had grown to love over his 15 years as a starship mechanic. His hands moved with practiced ease across the engine core of a Valtorian freighter, adjusting the plasma flow regulators with the kind of precision that had made him one of the most sought-after mechanics on Station Helios 9. "You're going to strip those threads if you keep forcing it," came a voice from behind him, cool and measured like winter wind across mountain peaks. Marcus didn't turn around. He knew that voice better than he knew the hum of any engine. "The threads are fine, Caliph. This model has reinforced titanium casings." Human titanium or proper titanium? His wife stepped into view, her presence commanding attention even in the cramped workshop space. Caliph stood nearly 7 feet tall, her scales shimmering between deep crimson and burnished gold, depending on how the light caught them. Her amber eyes held the kind of ancient intelligence that reminded everyone she was a dragon, even if she walked on 2 legs and wore the fitted jumpsuit of a station engineer. "The kind that works," Marcus replied, finally, looking up at her with a slight smile. 3 years of marriage, and he still felt his breath catch sometimes when she looked at him. Not from fear, though plenty of beings feared the dragonkin. No, it was something else entirely, something he'd never quite found the words for. Calith's tail swished behind her, a gesture he'd learned meant she was amused despite her neutral expression. "The station master wants to see you. Something about the new contract." Marcus set down his tools and wiped his hands on a rag that had seen better days. "Did he say what kind of contract?" "Military. Off-station." Her voice carried a note of disapproval. Caliph had made her feelings about military work clear on multiple occasions. Too much risk, not enough reward, and far too many humans treating their ships like disposable commodities instead of the complex machines they were. The walk to the station master's office took them through the main concourse of Helios 9, a bustling hub where a dozen species mingled in the pursuit of commerce and survival. Marcus noticed, as he always did, how other beings gave Caliph a wide berth. The dragonkin were respected, certainly, but also feared. They were warriors by nature, their people having conquered 7-star systems before joining the Galactic Collective on their own terms. Station Master Vorn, a squat Boluvian with skin like purple leather, looked up from his desk as they entered. His 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of agitation. "Marcus Chun, good. I need your decision quickly." "I haven't heard the offer yet," Marcus said, settling into one of the chairs that was definitely not designed for human proportions. Caliph remained standing, her presence filling the room despite her silence. Vorn pushed a data pad across the desk. "The Terran Defense Fleet needs a civilian contractor to retrofit their stealth frigates. New human technology, something about improved quantum shielding. They're offering triple your usual rate, plus hazard pay." Marcus picked up the pad, his eyes scanning the details. The numbers were indeed impressive, but the timeline was aggressive. 6 months, minimum, possibly longer if complications arose. This would require leaving the station. Obviously, Vorn's tail twitched with impatience. "You'd be working out of the Arcturus shipyards. Full military clearance, accommodations provided, the whole package." "We," Caliph said quietly. The single word carried weight. Vorn's eyes swiveled to her. "Excuse me. If Marcus goes, I go. We are married under both human and dragonkin law. What affects one affects both." The station master's skin darkened, a Boluvian sign of discomfort. "The contract specifies Marcus Chun specifically. His reputation, his skills. No offense intended, but the military is particular about their contractors. Then they can be particular about accepting both of US or finding someone else." Calith's voice remained calm, but Marcus saw the slight flare of her nostrils, the way her claws extended just a fraction from her fingertips. Small signs that others might miss, but he learned to read her moods over 3 years of marriage. 3 years of marriage. 3 years of living side by side, working together, sharing meals and quarters and the comfortable silence that came with deep familiarity. 3 years of carefully maintained distance, of separate sleeping areas, of touches that never lingered too long. It was, Marcus thought, not for the first time, the strangest marriage he'd ever heard of. The arrangement had been pragmatic from the start. Caliph had needed citizenship on a human-controlled station to continue her research into cross-species engineering techniques. Marcus had needed the tax benefits and housing priority that came with married status. A human marrying a dragonkin was unusual, but not unheard of. Both species had learned that practical arrangements often led to mutual benefit. What neither of them had anticipated was actually liking each other. "I'll need to consult with my superiors," Vorn said finally, clearly uncomfortable with the turn the conversation had taken. The military doesn't usually accommodate +1s on sensitive contracts. "Take your time," Marcus said, standing. "But the answer is both of us or neither. Caliph isn't a +1. She's my wife and an excellent engineer in her own right. Any project benefits from her involvement." They left the office together, walking in companionable silence back toward the residential sector. Helios 9 operated on a 26-hour cycle, and the station's lights were beginning their slow dim to simulate evening. Around them, shops were closing their shutters, and the dinner crowd was emerging. "You didn't have to do that," Caliph said as they entered their shared quarters. The space was larger than most station housing, divided into 2 sleeping areas with a common living space in between. Marcus's side showed the organized chaos of a mechanic's mind, with tools and parts carefully arranged on every surface. Caliph's side was pristine, almost austere, with only a few personal items that spoke to her dragonkin heritage. "Do what?" Marcus headed to the small kitchen unit, pulling out ingredients for dinner. Cooking was one of the few domestic skills he'd mastered, and Caliph had developed a surprising fondness for human food. "Insist I be included in the contract. You could earn a significant amount with that job." Marcus began chopping vegetables, the knife moving with the same precision he brought to his mechanical work. "And spend 6 months away from the station? Away from our workshop? Away from you?" He paused, considering his words. "That doesn't sound like a good deal to me, no matter the pay." In his peripheral vision, he saw Caliph go very still. Dragons had a way of becoming absolutely motionless when something caught their full attention, a predator's focus that could be unnerving if you weren't used to it. "You would miss me?" The question came out carefully neutral, but Marcus had learned to hear the undercurrents in her voice. "Of course I would. You're my wife, my friend, my best engineer." He kept his eyes on his cutting board, somehow finding it easier to say these things without looking at her directly. "I know this isn't a conventional marriage, but that doesn't mean I don't value having you in my life." The silence stretched long enough that Marcus finally looked up. Caliph was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read, her amber eyes reflecting the kitchen lights like molten gold. "I would miss you as well," she said finally, and something in her voice made Marcus's heart rate increase in a way that had nothing to do with exertion. The moment passed as Caliph moved to help with dinner, falling into the routine they'd established over 3 years of cohabitation. They worked well together in the kitchen, just as they did in the workshop, an easy synchronization that spoke to how much time they'd spent learning each other's patterns. Over dinner, they talked about the contract, weighing the benefits against the complications. The money would be significant, enough to finally upgrade their private workshop to the specifications they'd been dreaming about. The military connections could lead to more lucrative contracts down the line. But 6 months was a long time, and military work came with strings attached. "What does your gut tell you?" Caliph asked, pushing her empty plate aside. She developed a particular fondness for Marcus's stir-fry, though she always added extra protein that she'd prepared to her specific dietary needs. Marcus considered the question. "My gut says that any job worth doing is worth doing right. If they want me, they get both of us, or they compromise on quality by choosing someone else." The Terran Defense Fleet didn't get to be the premier military force in human space by accepting second best. Logical. Caliph's tail swished again, that same gesture of amusement. "Though I suspect your gut is also telling you that this could be an interesting challenge. New technology, complex problems to solve. You've been getting restless with the routine maintenance contracts." She wasn't wrong. Marcus had built his reputation on being able to fix anything, to solve problems that left other mechanics baffled. Lately, though, the work had become predictable. Replace this part, recalibrate that system, patch the same recurring issues that came from pilots who pushed their ships too hard. 6 months working on cutting-edge military technology, he mused. With you there to catch my mistakes, and probably redesign half the systems to be more efficient. I would never redesign half. Calith's tone was so dry it took Marcus a moment to realize she was joking. 3/4 at most. He laughed, the sound genuine and surprised. Calith's sense of humor was subtle, easy to miss if you weren't paying attention, but it was there. One of the many things he'd discovered about her over their marriage. The message from Vorn came 2 days later. The military had agreed to their terms, with one condition. Both Marcus and Calith would need to pass security clearances and sign extensive non-disclosure agreements. The work they'd be doing was classified at the highest levels. Quantum shielding technology. Marcus read from the contract details, sitting in their living area with Calith curled in her favored chair, a piece of furniture specifically designed to accommodate her tail. Interesting. I didn't know we'd made that much progress in that field. We haven't, Calith said, looking up from her own datapad where she was reviewing technical specifications. At least, not publicly. This must be black budget research. Does that bother you? Marcus knew that Calith had strong opinions about military secrecy, particularly when it came to technology that could have civilian applications. She was quiet for a long moment, her claws tapping thoughtfully against the arm of her chair. It bothers me less if we're involved. Better that competent engineers work on the project than incompetent ones who might cut corners for profit. They spent the next week preparing for their departure, arranging for their workshop to be managed by a trusted colleague, and packing up the tools and personal items they'd need for an extended stay at Arcturus shipyards. Marcus found himself surprised by how much their lives had become intertwined, how many shared possessions they'd accumulated without really noticing. Do you remember when we first met? Calith asked one evening as they were sorting through equipment. She held up a plasma torch that had been modified with parts from both human and dragonkin technology, a hybrid tool they'd created together during their first year of marriage. Marcus smiled at the memory. You told me I was using the wrong gauge wire for a hyperdrive repair. Very politely informed me that while human engineering was adequate, it could benefit from a more sophisticated understanding of energy flow dynamics. I was not polite. I was correct. But there was warmth in her voice, a fondness that had been absent in those early days when they'd been nothing more than two strangers bound by a contract marriage. You were both, Marcus admitted, and I was too stubborn to admit it for about 3 weeks, until that Vethian cruiser came in with the damaged reactor core. That had been the turning point, he realized now. The repair job that had required both of their skills, that had kept them working side by side for 72 hours straight, surviving on stimulants and sheer determination. By the end of it, they'd save the ship and earn a reputation as the best engineering team on the station. They'd also, somewhere in those 3 days, become friends. The transport to Arcturus shipyards was scheduled for the following week. As the day approached, Marcus found himself experiencing an emotion he couldn't quite name. It wasn't nervousness about the job. He was confident in his abilities and knew Calith was one of the finest engineers he'd ever worked with. It was something else, something to do with the way things were shifting between them. Small moments had started to accumulate. The way Calith's hand would linger on his shoulder when she leaned over to check his work. The way Marcus found himself making excuses to stay in the common area rather than retreating to his separate quarters in the evening. The way their conversations had gradually become more personal, moving beyond the safe territory of engineering and station gossip into the deeper waters of hopes, fears, and dreams. 3 years of marriage without intimacy. 3 years of maintaining careful boundaries, of respecting the practical nature of their arrangement. It had seemed like the right approach at the time, the fair thing to do when their union was based on mutual benefit rather than romance. But somewhere along the way, the practical had become personal, and Marcus was beginning to wonder if those carefully maintained boundaries were protecting them or holding them back. The night before their departure, Marcus couldn't sleep. He lay in his quarters, staring at the ceiling, his mind churning through thoughts that had nothing to do with quantum shielding or military contracts. Finally, he gave up and padded out to the common area, intending to review the technical specifications one more time. He found Caliph already there, seated by the large viewport that looked out onto the stars. She was in what he'd come to think of as her contemplative pose, her tail curled around her body, her wings slightly extended in a way that suggested relaxation despite her formal posture. "Couldn't sleep either?" Marcus asked, settling into the chair beside her. "My kind doesn't require as much sleep as humans," Caliph replied, but there was a note in her voice that suggested that wasn't the whole truth. "I was thinking about tomorrow, about this new chapter we're entering. Having second thoughts about the contract? No, second thoughts about other things." She turned to look at him directly, and in the starlight coming through the viewport, her scales seemed to glow with an inner fire. "Marcus, can I ask you something personal?" His mouth suddenly felt dry. "Of course. Why did you really insist I be included in the military contract? The truth, not the practical reasoning you gave to Vorn." Marcus took a breath, considering his answer carefully. This felt like one of those moments where honesty mattered more than safety. Because the idea of spending 6 months without you felt wrong. Because over the past 3 years, you've become the most important person in my life. Because somewhere along the way, this stopped being a practical arrangement and became something real. Caliph's eyes widened slightly, a crack in her usually composed demeanor. "I thought I was the only one who felt that way." "What do you mean?" She looked back out at the stars, and when she spoke, her voice was softer than he'd ever heard it. "Dragonkin mate for life, Marcus. It's part of our nature. When we bond with someone, it's permanent, absolute. I thought I could enter into a practical marriage without triggering that instinct. I was wrong." Marcus's heart was pounding now. "When did you realize?" "The reactor core repair. Day 2, hour 47, when you caught the cascade failure I'd missed because I was too exhausted to see straight. You saved not just the ship, but my life, and you did it without hesitation, without thinking about the risk to yourself." She turned back to him, and there was something vulnerable in her expression that he'd never seen before. "That's when I knew. This human mechanic, with his clever hands and his stubborn insistence on doing things a hard way, he was mine. My mate, even if he didn't know it. Even if I couldn't tell him." "Why couldn't you tell me?" Marcus asked, though he thought he already knew the answer. "Because our marriage was supposed to be practical. Because I didn't want to pressure you or make you feel obligated. Because I was terrified that if I told you how I felt, you'd see me differently. Not as your partner or your friend, but as something threatening, something to be managed and kept at a distance." Marcus reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to. When she didn't, he took her hand in his. Her scales were warm beneath his palm, smooth and surprisingly delicate despite their strength. "For the record," he said quietly, "I could never see you as threatening. Impressive, absolutely. Brilliant, definitely. But threatening? Never. You're Caliph, my wife, my partner, my friend. And maybe, if you're willing, something more." Her claws curled gently around his hand, careful not to scratch. "What did you have in mind?" "I think," Marcus said, feeling like he was standing on the edge of something vast and terrifying and wonderful, "that maybe we should stop maintaining separate quarters. Stop pretending this is just a practical arrangement. Start being honest about what this marriage has become. And what has it become?" He met her eyes, those amber depths that held the fire of stars. "Real. It's become real." Caliph was quiet for a long moment, and Marcus felt his heart hammering against his ribs. Then, slowly, she smiled. It was the first time he'd ever seen her truly smile. Not the small quirk of lips that passed for amusement, but a genuine, unguarded expression of joy. "I would like that," she said. "Very much." They sat together by the viewport for hours, talking in a way they never had before. Not about work or contracts or the practical matters that had dominated their relationship, They talked about feelings and fears about the past 3 years and the future that might stretch before them. They talked about dragonkin bonding customs and human courtship rituals, laughing at the differences and finding the unexpected similarities. By the time the station's lights began their gradual brightening to simulate morning, Marcus felt like he was seeing Caliph for the first time. Not the composed engineer or the dignified dragonkin, but the person beneath. Someone who was brilliant and kind, fierce and gentle. Someone who had chosen him just as thoroughly as he'd chosen her. The transport to Arcturus was scheduled for noon. They spent the morning making final preparations, but there was a new energy between them now, a sense of possibility that made even mundane tasks feel significant. When Calipha's hand brushed against his while they were checking equipment, neither of them pulled away. When Marcus made a joke and Caliph laughed, the sound was free and unrestrained in a way it had never been before. As they boarded the transport, carrying their tools and equipment and the uncertain promise of what came next, Marcus found himself thinking about those 3 years. 3 years of marriage without intimacy, of careful boundaries and maintained distance. It had seemed like the right approach at the time, the safe thing to do. But sometimes he was learning the right thing and the safe thing weren't the same. Sometimes the right thing required stepping off the edge into the unknown, trusting that the person you'd chosen to walk beside would be there to catch you. He glanced at Caliph as the transport lifted away from Helios 9, watching her watch the stars through the viewport. His wife, his partner, his friend, and now maybe, finally, something more. The journey to Arcturus would take 3 days. 3 days to figure out what came next, to navigate this new territory they'd opened between them. 3 days to transform a practical arrangement into something neither of them had planned for, but both of them wanted. 3 years without intimacy, Marcus thought. But maybe, just maybe, that was about to change. The Arcturus shipyards hung in space like a mechanical constellation, a vast network of docks and construction bays that serviced the Terran defense fleet's most advanced vessels. As their transport approached, Marcus found himself impressed despite his years of experience with orbital facilities. This wasn't just a repair station or a commercial hub. This was where humanity built the ships that defended its borders and pushed the boundaries of explored space. Impressive, Caliph murmured beside him, her eyes tracking the movements of dozens of ships and service craft. The organizational efficiency alone must be remarkable. Speaking of efficiency, Marcus said, pulling up the welcome packet on his datapad, "We're assigned to Base 17. Living quarters in the civilian contractor section, full workshop access, and a security briefing scheduled for tomorrow morning." 1 set of quarters? Caliph's tone was carefully neutral, but Marcus caught the subtle question underneath. "We can request separate accommodations if you want," he offered, even though the idea made something in his chest tighten uncomfortably. Their conversation back on Helios 9 had been honest and hopeful, but 3 days of travel in close quarters had left them both uncertain about next steps. They'd fallen into old patterns of companionable coexistence, neither quite ready to push past decades of learned caution. Caliph was quiet for a moment, her tail swishing in that way that meant she was thinking something through carefully. "I think 1 set of quarters is appropriate. We are married, after all. It would seem strange to request otherwise." "Right. Practical." Marcus tried to keep the disappointment from his voice and wasn't entirely successful. Her hand found his claws gentle against his palm. "Marcus, stop overthinking. We're both adults with functional communication skills. If sharing quarters becomes uncomfortable, we'll adjust. But I'd like to try." The warmth in her voice settled something in him. Yeah, I'd like that too." The docking procedures took another hour, enough time for them to gather their equipment and prepare for arrival. The bay master who met them was a grizzled woman named Torres, her gray hair pulled back in a practical bun, her eyes sharp with the kind of assessment that came from years of managing difficult personalities in high-stress environments. "Chun and Caliph?" She looked between them, her gaze lingering on Caliph's scales and Impressive height without apparent concern. Good. We don't usually get Dragonkin contractors, but your file says you know your way around a fusion core. That true. Among other things, Caliph replied evenly. Great. You'll need it. The frigate waiting in Base 17 has given 3 other teams nervous breakdowns trying to install the new shielding system. Torres started walking, and they fell in a step behind her. Command keeps saying the tech is revolutionary. I keep saying revolutionary doesn't mean much if nobody can make it work without blowing up half the bay. Marcus exchanged a glance with Caliph. This was starting to sound more complicated than the contract had suggested. What's the core issue? If I knew that, I wouldn't need you. Torres led them through a series of corridors that hummed with the vibration of heavy machinery and life support systems. The quantum shielding interfaces with the ship's power grid, but every time we bring the system online, we get cascade failures across unrelated systems. Navigation, environmental controls, even the damn coffee makers shut down. Harmonic interference, Caliph said immediately. The quantum field generation must be creating resonance patterns that interact with the ship's electrical frequency. Torres stopped and turned to look at her with new respect. That's what the last team concluded right before they quit. Said it would require completely redesigning the power distribution system, which Command says isn't an option. Then, Command needs to hear from engineers who understand the difference between what's impossible and what's merely difficult, Marcus said. Can we see the ship? Base 17 was vast enough to hold 3 frigates comfortably, but only one occupied the space. The TDF Nightrunner was a sleek vessel built for speed and stealth, her hull black as deep space, her lines suggesting a predator built for silent hunting. Marcus felt the familiar thrill he always experienced when faced with a new engineering challenge, the puzzle solver's excitement at seeing something broken that he might be able to fix. She's beautiful, Caliph breathed, and Marcus heard genuine appreciation in her voice. Dragons respected craftsmanship, and the Nightrunner was undeniably well-crafted. A young lieutenant was waiting for them at the ship's access ramp, his uniform crisp despite the grease stains on his hands. Marcus Chun, I am Lieutenant Reeves. I'll be your military liaison during the retrofit. His eyes widened slightly when he saw Caliph. And you must be the +1 they mentioned. I'm his wife, Caliph corrected coolly, and his engineering partner, Caliph of the Bronze Peak clan. Reeves had the grace to look embarrassed. My apologies. I meant no disrespect. It's just unusual to have civilian contractors who are married, much less cross-species. We like to be unusual, Marcus said, keeping his tone light, even though he felt a protective instinct rising. Now about this shielding system. We'd like to review all the previous installation attempts and failure reports. The next several hours disappeared into the kind of deep technical analysis that Marcus loved. He and Caliph worked through reports, examined the existing installations, and traced power conduits through the Nightrunner's guts with a methodical thoroughness that had built their reputation. Reeves proved surprisingly helpful, his engineering knowledge more extensive than his rank suggested. You actually know your way around these systems, Caliph observed during a brief break, her tone suggesting mild surprise. Reeves grinned. I was an engineer before I was an officer. Turns out the military prefers people who understand the ships they're commanding. Though not everyone appreciates having a lieutenant second-guessing their technical decisions. Then, they're fools, Caliph said bluntly. Rank means nothing if the person holding it lacks competence. Marcus hid a smile. This was vintage Caliph, her dragonkin directness cutting through military protocol like a plasma torch through hull plating. He'd learned to appreciate it, though it had gotten them both into interesting situations over the years. By the time they finally made their way to their assigned quarters, exhaustion was setting in. The living space was larger than Marcus had expected, designed with the understanding that contractors might be spending months in residence. There was a common area with a small kitchen, a workspace with multiple terminals, and a bedroom. One bedroom. Marcus found himself standing in the doorway, suddenly, very aware of Caliph's presence behind him. The bed was large, clearly sized to accommodate non-human species, but it was still just one bed. "We should have discussed this," Caliph said quietly. "I can request a couch or sleeping mat for the common area." "No." The word came out more forcefully than Marcus intended. He turned to face her, making himself meet her amber eyes. "We agreed to stop maintaining artificial distance. That includes sleeping arrangements." "Marcus." Her voice was gentle. "I don't want to pressure you. I know Dragonkin customs are different from human ones. Our physical relationship, or lack thereof, should progress at whatever pace feels right for you." He stepped closer to her, reaching up to cup her face with one hand. She was so much taller than him that he had to stretch slightly, but she leaned into his touch, her scales warm beneath his palm. "What feels right to me," he said carefully, "is being honest about where we are. We've been married for 3 years. We've been friends for almost as long. We've been in love, apparently, for at least part of that time, even if neither of us wanted to admit it. I don't know exactly what comes next, but I know I want to stop treating you like a roommate I'm polite with." Caliph's eyes searched his face. "What do you want instead?" "I want to fall asleep next to my wife. I want to wake up beside the person I care most about in the universe. And, yeah, I want the physical intimacy that should come with marriage, but I'm not in a rush." He smiled slightly. "We've waited 3 years. We can wait until we're both ready." She pulled him close, wrapping her arms around him in a way that was careful of her strength, but still unmistakably an embrace. Marcus let himself relax into it, feeling the steady beat of her heart, the warmth of her body, the rightness of finally letting himself hold her without reservation. "I'm ready," she whispered against his hair. "I've been ready since day 47 of that reactor repair. But I'll wait as long as you need." They stood like that for a long moment, just holding each other, feeling the shape of this new intimacy they were allowing themselves. When they finally pulled apart, Marcus felt something settled in his chest that had been restless for 3 years. The sleeping arrangements proved less awkward than either of them had feared. They prepared for bed with the comfortable efficiency of people who knew each other's rhythms, changing into sleep clothes and moving through the small space without collision. When they finally settled under the covers, there was a moment of uncertainty, of not quite knowing how to arrange themselves. Then, Caliph extended one wing slightly, creating a space against her side, and Marcus understood the invitation. He curled against her, his head resting on her shoulder, her wings settling over him like a living blanket. Her scales were smooth and warm, her heartbeat a steady drum beneath his ear. "This okay?" she asked softly. "Perfect," Marcus murmured, already feeling sleep pulling at him. "Absolutely perfect." He felt her press a gentle kiss to the top of his head, a gesture so tender it made his throat tight. Then exhaustion claimed him, and he slept better than he had in months. The security briefing the next morning proved to be extensive and somewhat intimidating. The officer in charge, a stern woman named Commander Briggs, made it clear that the quantum shielding technology was classified at the highest levels. Any breach of security would result in immediate termination of the contract and possible criminal charges. "The principle is simple enough," she explained, displaying a holographic model of the shielding system. "Quantum entanglement allows us to create a probability field around the ship. To external sensors, the ship exists in multiple locations simultaneously, making targeting solutions nearly impossible. But the practical application is less simple," Marcus said, studying the model. "The energy requirements alone must be massive, which is why we need it integrated with the existing power grid," Briggs confirmed. "Previous teams have tried isolating the shielding system on its own power supply, but that limits operational duration to less than 10 minutes. Useless in actual combat." Caliph leaned forward, her eyes tracking the holographic display with intense focus. "The harmonic interference isn't a flaw in the shielding system itself. It's a consequence of quantum field generation interacting with conventional electrical systems. You're trying to make two fundamentally different technologies coexist in the same space." "Can it be done?" Briggs asked bluntly. "Everything can be done if you're willing to accept the right compromises," Marcus said. The question is what compromises command is willing to accept. The meeting went on for another 2 hours, covering technical specifications, security protocols, and timeline expectations. By the end, Marcus had a clearer picture of why previous teams had failed. They'd been trying to force the quantum shielding to adapt to the existing ship systems, when what was really needed was a fundamental rethinking of how both systems interacted. This is going to take longer than 6 months, he told Caliph as they made their way back to Base 17. What we're talking about is essentially redesigning the core systems of an entire class of frigates. Then, we tell Command that, she replied. Better an honest timeline than repeated failures because we try to rush. Lieutenant Reeves was waiting for them at the Night Runner, his expression suggesting he'd been expecting them. Commander Briggs sent word you might need extended access to the ship's systems. I've arranged full clearance for both of you. Including override authority? Caliph asked. Within reason. You can't launch the ship or activate weapon systems, but anything related to power distribution, shielding, or engineering systems is yours to modify. Marcus felt a grin spreading across his face. This was what he loved about complicated jobs, the moment when he had everything he needed to really dig into the problem. Then, let's get started. They spent the rest of the day deep in the Night Runner's engineering sections, mapping out the existing power grid and identifying the points where quantum field interference was most likely to occur. It was painstaking work, requiring them to trace individual circuits through kilometers of conduit, but it was also satisfying in the way that only complex problems could be. Working with Caliph in this environment felt different than it had on the station. Maybe it was the previous night's intimacy, or maybe it was simply being in a new place where they could define their partnership without the weight of 3 years of careful distance. Whatever the reason, Marcus found himself more aware of her presence, more attuned to the small ways she communicated her thoughts through gestures and expressions. "Hand me the resonance scanner," she said at one point, her attention focused on a junction box that had been giving them strange readings. Marcus passed her the tool, their fingers brushing in the exchange. The contact sent a small thrill through him, a reminder that they were allowed to touch now, allowed to acknowledge the attraction that had been building between them. Caliph glanced at him, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Enjoying yourself?" "Just appreciating my engineering partner," he replied, not bothering to hide his own smile. "And my wife?" "Smooth." But her tail swished with pleasure, and when she returned to her work, there was a lightness in her movements that hadn't been there before. They worked until exhaustion forced them to stop, returning to their quarters with grease on their hands and satisfaction in their accomplishment. They'd identified the main sources of harmonic interference and developed a preliminary plan for addressing them. It would require extensive modifications to the power distribution system, but it was achievable. Over dinner, pieced together from the limited selection in their quarters kitchen, they discussed the next steps. Marcus found himself watching Caliph as she talked, noticing details he'd somehow missed before. The way her scales caught the light when she gestured. The intelligence in her eyes as she worked through complex problems. The grace in her movements despite her size. "You're staring," she observed, pausing mid-sentence. "I am," Marcus agreed, feeling no need to deny it. "Is that a problem?" "No." She set down her fork, her full attention on him now. "I quite like it, actually. You look at me the way I've wanted you to look at me for 2 years. Only 2 years. The first year, I was still trying to convince myself this was just a practical arrangement." She reached across the small table, taking his hand in hers. "By the second year, I'd accepted that I was completely infatuated with the stubborn human mechanic who insisted on doing everything the hard way. But I didn't think you felt the same." Marcus turned his hand over, lacing his fingers through hers and marveling at how well they fit despite the differences in size and shape. "I spent 2 years trying to figure out why I kept making excuses to work late at the workshop when I knew you'd be there. Why I was disappointed on the rare occasions you had business off-station. Why the idea of our marriage ending made me feel physically ill. And did you figure it out?" "Eventually." Turns out I'm a little slow when it comes to recognizing my own feelings. He stood, moving around the table to stand beside her. But I'm trying to be faster now. Caliph looked up at him, her amber eyes reflecting the quarter's soft lighting. Slowly, giving her time to pull away, Marcus leaned down and kissed her. It was different from any kiss he'd experienced before. Her lips were warm, her scales smooth against his skin where his hands cupped her face. She made a soft sound, surprise and pleasure combined, and one of her hands came up to rest against his chest, claws carefully retracted. When they pulled apart, both of them were breathing harder. Marcus rested his forehead against hers, feeling the solid reality of her, the confirmation that this was happening, that they were finally letting themselves have what they'd both wanted for so long. That was nice, Caliph said, her voice slightly unsteady. We should do that more often. Marcus laughed, the sound surprised and happy. I was thinking the same thing. They cleaned up from dinner together, the domestic task feeling weighted with new significance. Every brush of hands, every shared smile, every comfortable silence felt like another brick in the foundation of what they were building. When they finally made their way to bed, the nervousness from the previous night was absent, replaced by a warm anticipation. This time, when Marcus curled against Caliph's side, he felt confident enough to press a kiss to her shoulder, to let his hand rest on her waist. She responded by pulling him closer, her wings settling over them both in a gesture that felt protective and possessive in the best way. "Good night, Marcus," she murmured into the darkness. "Good night, Caliph." He fell asleep smiling, his wife's heartbeat steady beneath his ear, and dreamed of quantum fields and starships and the future they were building together, one careful step at a time. The weeks at Arcturus shipyards developed their own rhythm. Marcus and Caliph fell into a pattern of working 14-hour days on the Night Runner, breaking only for meals and the occasional mandatory rest period that Lieutenant Reeves insisted upon. The work was challenging in exactly the way Marcus loved, requiring him to think beyond conventional engineering and into the realm of creative problem-solving. The quantum shielding system was elegant in theory, but brutally complex in practice. The probability fields it generated didn't just interfere with ship systems. They created what Caliph called coherent shadows, moments where the quantum uncertainty bled into the physical world in unpredictable ways. Instruments would give contradictory readings. Power flows would spike and drop for no apparent reason. In one memorable incident, the coffee maker in the crew quarters had briefly existed in two locations simultaneously. "This is impossible," Marcus said one afternoon, staring at the readout from their latest test. They'd spent 3 days recalibrating the power distribution nodes, and the results were somehow worse than before. "Impossible is just a word engineers use when they haven't found the solution yet," Caliph replied, her attention focused on a holographic display showing the quantum field interactions. "Look at this pattern. See how the interference peaks align with the ship's structural resonance frequencies." Marcus moved to stand beside her, studying the display. His wife had an uncanny ability to see patterns in data that he missed, a spatial intelligence that seemed to be enhanced by her dragonkin heritage. "The ship's hull is acting like a tuning fork." "Precisely. Every ship has a natural frequency, determined by its mass, structure, and materials. The quantum field generation is exciting that frequency, which in turn creates standing waves throughout the power grid. So we need to either change the ship's resonance frequency or modify the quantum field to avoid it." Marcus ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration he'd developed over years of difficult problems. Changing the structural frequency would require rebuilding the ship. Modifying the quantum field might destabilize the shielding effect. Or, Caliph said slowly, her eyes still tracking the data patterns, "we introduce a damping system, something that absorbs the resonance energy and converts it into useful power instead of letting it cascade through the ship's systems." Marcus felt the familiar thrill of insight clicking into place. "A harmonic buffer. We need to place them at strategic points throughout the power grid, tuned specifically to the interference frequencies. It will be delicate work. Each buffer would need individual calibration. Caliph looked at him, and he saw the same excitement in her eyes that he felt in his chest. But it could work. They spent the next week designing the harmonic buffers, working in their quarters late into the night when the shipyard's day cycle had ended. Marcus found these evening work sessions particularly enjoyable, not just for the engineering challenge, but for the intimacy they created. Sitting side by side at their shared terminal, shoulders touching, occasionally breaking to share observations or debate approaches, it felt like the culmination of everything their partnership had been building toward. "You're doing it again," Caliph said one night, not looking up from her calculations. "Doing what?" "Watching me instead of working." But there was warmth in her voice, not accusation. Marcus didn't bother denying it. "I'm allowed to appreciate my wife." "True." She saved her work and turned to face him fully, her expression serious despite the gentle tone. "Marcus, can I ask you something?" "Always." "Are you happy?" "With us, I mean. With how things have developed." She hesitated, unusual for someone usually so direct. "I know this isn't how human marriages typically progress. We've been backwards about everything. Married before we were in love, living together before we were intimate. I want to make sure you're not just going along with this because it seems like the next logical step." Marcus took her hands in his, struck by the vulnerability in the question. This was Caliph, brilliant and fierce, capable of redesigning a starship's power grid in her sleep, and she was worried about whether he wanted this. "I'm happy," he said simply. "Happier than I've been in my entire life. And you're right, this isn't a typical progression. We've done everything backwards. But you know what? I think I prefer it this way." "Why?" "Because we built the foundation first. We became friends, partners, people who genuinely like each other. The romantic stuff, the physical intimacy, it's not the basis of our relationship. It's the bonus we get because we already chose each other for all the right reasons." Caliph's eyes were bright, the amber color seeming to glow in the quarter's dim lighting. "That's a very logical way of looking at love. Is there a better way?" He leaned forward, close enough to feel her breath on his face. "I love you because you challenge me, because you make me better at what I do, because you think that spending 3 weeks designing harmonic buffers is a reasonable use of time. And yes, I love you because you're beautiful, and being near you makes my heart race, but that's just part of it. I love you too," she said quietly. And then she kissed him with an intensity that made his previous understanding of the word kiss seem woefully inadequate. They'd been taking things slowly, careful with each other in a way that felt right given how long they'd waited. But this kiss was different, deeper, laden with 3 years of denied wanting and the promise of finally letting themselves have what they both desired. When they pulled apart, both breathing hard, Marcus saw his own need reflected in Caliph's eyes. "We should probably get some sleep," he said, the words coming out rough. "Big test tomorrow with the first buffer prototype." "We should," Caliph agreed, but neither of them moved. The moment stretched between them, full of possibility and question. Then Marcus stood, extending his hand to her. "Come to bed with me." It wasn't the most eloquent invitation, but Caliph took his hand without hesitation, letting him lead her to the bedroom. What followed was tender and awkward and perfect, 2 people figuring out how to be together after 3 years of careful distance. They learned each other slowly, with care and patience and occasional laughter when logistics proved complicated. "This would be easier if humans had tails," Caliph observed at one point, trying to arrange herself around the furniture in a way that accommodated both her size and her wings. "Noted for the next species evolution," Marcus replied, making her laugh in a way that was free and joyful. Afterward, lying tangled together in the darkness, Marcus felt a completeness he hadn't known he was missing. Caliph traced patterns on his chest with one careful claw, her touch gentle despite the inherent danger of those sharp points. 3 years, she murmured. "We waited 3 years for this. Was it worth the wait?" "Absolutely." She pressed a kiss to his shoulder. "Though I think we've earned a right to make up for lost time." Marcus grinned into the darkness. "I like how you think." The harmonic buffer test the next day was a disaster. Not because the theory was wrong, but because the prototype they constructed wasn't robust enough to handle the actual energy loads. The first buffer overloaded within 30 seconds of the quantum field activation, sending a cascade failure through the test section that required 4 hours of repair work. Back to the drawing board, Marcus said, surveying the smoking remains of their prototype. Not entirely. Kalith was already examining the sensor data, her mind clearly racing through possibilities. The buffer worked for 30 seconds. That's longer than any other solution has managed. We just need to improve the power handling capacity. Lieutenant Reeves joined them, his uniform sporting new grease stains that suggested he'd been helping with the repairs. Commander Briggs wants a progress report. What should I tell her? Tell her we had a partial success, and we know what needs to be modified, Marcus said. Give us 2 weeks, and we'll have a working prototype. 2 weeks? Reeves looked skeptical. The last team took 3 months to develop their failed solution. The last team didn't have me, Kalith said with calm certainty. Or Marcus. 2 weeks. She was right. It took them 13 days of intense work, endless calculations, and more than a few arguments about the best approach, but they finally produced a harmonic buffer that could handle the full load of the quantum field generation. The test was scheduled for a morning when half the shipyard's command staff showed up to observe, Commander Briggs among them. This had better work, she told Marcus bluntly. The Admiralty is losing patience with this project. It'll work, Marcus said with more confidence than he felt. He glanced at Kalith, who gave him a small nod of reassurance. The Nitrunner's quantum shielding came online slowly, the probability fields building in carefully controlled increments. Marcus watched the readings on his terminal, his heart pounding as the energy levels climbed. The harmonic buffers are doing their job, absorbing the resonance energy and converting it into supplemental power instead of letting it cascade through the ship's systems. 30 seconds, 1 minute, 2 minutes. The buffers held stable, the power grid remained balanced, and the quantum shielding maintained full effectiveness. Around the observation deck, Marcus heard murmurs of approval and disbelief in equal measure. 5 minutes, Lieutenant Reeves announced, his voice showing his own surprise. All systems nominal. 10 minutes. Still stable. By the time they shut down the test, after 30 minutes of continuous operation, Marcus felt like he could barely stand. Not from physical exhaustion, but from the emotional release of finally making it work. Excellent work, Commander Briggs said, her stern expression softening slightly. I'll inform the Admiralty that we have a functioning prototype. They'll want to move forward with fleet-wide implementation. After the command staff left, Marcus and Kalith stood together on the observation deck, looking down at the Nitrunner. The ship seemed to gleam with new purpose, no longer a problem to be solved, but a proof of concept for technology that could change how humanity defended itself in space. We did it, Marcus said, still somewhat amazed. You doubted? Kalith's tone was teasing. Maybe a little, especially after the first buffer exploded. He turned to face her, not caring that there were still technicians working in the bay who might see. I couldn't have done this without you. I know, but she was smiling as she said it, the expression soft and private in a way that was just for him. We make a good team. The best. He wanted to kiss her, but settled for taking her hand instead, conscious of their public setting. There would be time for more intimate celebrations later, in the privacy of their quarters. The success with the Nitrunner led to immediate demands from command for Marcus and Kalith to oversee the implementation across the entire stealth frigate fleet. What was supposed to be a 6-month contract turned into a year-long commitment, with periodic returns to Helios 9 to handle the business of their personal workshop. During one of these returns, about 8 months into the project, they received an unexpected visitor. Kalith's brother, Draken, arrived at their quarters with the kind of dramatic flair that seemed bred into dragonkin nobility. He was larger than Kalith, his scales a deeper crimson, his bearing suggesting someone accustomed to command. Little sister, he said, pulling Kalith into an embrace that lifted her off her feet despite her size. It's been too long, Draken. Kalith's voice was warm but held a note of caution. What brings you to Helios, 9? Can't a brother visit his sister? Draken's eyes, amber like Calith's but with flecks of gold, moved to Marcus. And meet the human who married her. Marcus stepped forward, extending his hand in a human gesture of greeting. Marcus Chun, it's good to finally meet you. Calith speaks of you often. Draken studied him for a long moment, then surprised Marcus by ignoring the offered hand and pulling him into a bone-crushing hug. My sister's mate. Your family, which means human gestures of greeting are insufficient. When Draken finally released him, Marcus had to work to catch his breath. That's quite a greeting. Dragonkin don't do things halfway. Draken moved further into their quarters, his gaze taking in the combined space with interest. I see you finally. Stop maintaining separate living areas. Good. It was painful watching you dance around each other for 3 years. You knew? Calith asked, surprise clear in her voice. Little sister, everyone knew. The way you talked about him in your messages, the way you deflected questions about the nature of your marriage. It was obvious to anyone paying attention that you'd bonded with him, even if you hadn't admitted it yet. Marcus felt his face heating. We've admitted it now. Clearly, Draken's smile was knowing. The question is, when are you going to make it official in the Dragonkin tradition? Calith's scales actually flushed darker, a sign of embarrassment that Marcus had rarely seen. Draken, we're still figuring things out. You've been married for 3 years, and you're still figuring things out. Draken shook his head in mock disappointment. Marcus, do you understand what bonding means to our people? Some, Marcus said carefully. Calith explained that it's permanent, that dragonkin mate for life. It's more than that. When a dragonkin bonds, it's recognized in our souls. We can sense our mate's emotions, their well-being, even across vast distances. It's not magic, just an evolution of empathy that our species developed over millennia of forming permanent pair bonds. Draken looked between them. My sister bonded with you 2.5 years ago. Has she explained what that means for her? Marcus glanced at Calith, seeing discomfort in her posture. She mentioned that the reactor core repair triggered something in her. Triggered is a mild word. When a dragonkin bonds, it's absolute. Every instinct, every aspect of their nature becomes oriented toward their mate. It's why we're so careful about choosing partners, why bonding is treated with such reverence in our culture. Draken's expression softened as he looked at his sister. And you've been living with that bond for 2.5 years while maintaining a polite distance from the person your soul recognized as your other half. That must have been torture. I managed, Calith said quietly. You shouldn't have had to manage. Draken turned back to Marcus. I'm not here to interfere or demand anything. I came because our mother wanted me to check on Calith, to make sure she was happy. I can report that she clearly is, which means you're taking care of her properly. I'm trying to, Marcus said, though I'm still learning what that means in dragonkin terms. It means being honest about your feelings, which you finally managed. It means recognizing that when a dragonkin chooses you, they're choosing you forever with everything they are. And it means understanding that half measures don't work for us. We don't do casual or temporary. We bond completely or not at all. The weight of those words settled over Marcus. He'd understood intellectually that Calith's commitment to him was absolute, but hearing it explained so bluntly brought it into sharp focus. She hadn't just fallen in love with him. She'd bonded with him at some fundamental level that was written into her very nature. I understand, he said, meeting Draken's eyes. And, for the record, I'm not interested in half measures either. Calith is my wife, my partner, my best friend. I'm in this completely for the rest of our lives. Draken studied him for another long moment, then nodded with apparent satisfaction. Good. Then, you should know that our family would be honored to recognize your union in the traditional dragonkin ceremony, if you're interested. It's not required, your human marriage is valid, but it would mean something to our people, to our mother especially. We'll consider it, Calith said, moving to stand beside Marcus. Her hand found his, their fingers lacing together with practiced ease. But right now we have a fleet of frigates to finish outfitting with quantum shielding. Family ceremonies will have to wait. Fair enough. The shielding project has been making waves, even in Dragonkin space. The collective is impressed by what you've accomplished. Draken moved toward the door, then paused. Oh, and little sister? I'm happy for you. Truly, you deserve someone who sees you for who you are, not just the warrior or the engineer or the Dragonkin noble. Someone who sees all of it and loves you anyway. After he left, Marcus and Calith stood together in silence for a moment. Finally, Marcus spoke. Your family has interesting timing. Draken has always enjoyed making dramatic appearances. But Calith's voice was thoughtful. He's right, though. We should talk about the bonding ceremony. It's important in my culture, and if we're building a life together, both our traditions should have a place in it. Marcus pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his head against her chest. Then we'll do it. After we finish the fleet retrofits, we'll have the ceremony, meet your family properly, do all the things we've been too busy or too cautious to do. And what about your family? Your traditions? My parents passed years ago. No siblings, few relatives that I'm close to. But you know what? That means we get to build our own traditions, combine the best of both our cultures, and make something uniquely ours. Calith's arms tightened around him, her wings spreading slightly in a gesture he'd learned meant contentment. I like that idea. Something uniquely ours. They stood like that for a while, holding each other in the quiet of their quarters, thinking about the future they were building together. A future that had started with a practical arrangement and transformed into something neither of them had planned for, but both of them treasured. 3 years of marriage without intimacy. It seemed like another lifetime now, a careful dance they needed to perform before they were ready for the real thing. Marcus wouldn't change it if he could. That time had built the foundation for what they had now, a partnership based on mutual respect and genuine affection that went deeper than simple attraction. I love you, he said into the comfortable silence. I love you too, Calith replied, her voice warm with contentment. My mate, my husband, my perfectly stubborn human mechanic who insists on doing everything the hard way. Marcus laughed, the sound muffled against her. Takes one to know one. True. She pressed a kiss to the top of his head. Now, shall we get back to work? Those frigates won't retrofit themselves. In a minute, Marcus said, not ready to let go yet. Let me just enjoy this for a little while longer. And Calith, who could reshape power grids and wrestle quantum physics into submission, who was one of the finest engineers in known space, simply held him and agreed that some moments were worth savoring, even when there was work to be done. The completion of the fleet retrofit took another 4 months of intensive work, traveling between shipyards and coordinating with dozens of engineering teams across human space. By the time Marcus and Calith finally returned to Helios, 9 with the contract fulfilled, they'd been gone for nearly a year and a half. The station felt both familiar and strange, like putting on an old jacket and finding it fits differently than remembered. Their workshop had been well maintained by their colleague, but it still needed their personal touch to feel like home again. Marcus spent a morning reorganizing his tools, finding comfort in the familiar weight of each wrench and scanner, while Calith updated their computer systems with the new technical knowledge they'd gained from the military project. It's strange being back, she said over lunch in their quarters, which they'd kept maintained even during their long absence. I'd forgotten how much I missed this place. Missed the place or missed having our own space? Marcus asked, knowing the distinction mattered. The military housing at Arcturus had been comfortable but impersonal, and they'd shared facilities with dozens of other contractors. Both. Calith set down her utensils, her expression thoughtful. The work at Arcturus was challenging and important, but this is home, our home. The place where we figured out how to be married instead of just business partners sharing quarters. Marcus reached across the table to take her hand. We did a lot more than figure that out. True. Her smile was private, warm. We became what we should have been from the start. The success of the quantum shielding project had made them minor celebrities in engineering circles. Within days of their return to Helios 9, they were flooded with contract offers from corporations, governments, and private interests, all wanting their expertise. Marcus found it overwhelming in a way the actual work had never been. "We should hire someone to handle the business side," he said one evening, reviewing yet another contract proposal. "This is taking more time than the actual engineering." "Agreed. I'd rather rebuild an engine than negotiate contract terms." Caliph was working on her own terminal, sorting through technical journals that had accumulated during their absence. "We could afford a proper business manager now." The military contract paid well. They'd been careful with their earnings, investing most of it back into their workshop and equipment. But there was more than enough left over to expand their operation if they chose to. The question was whether they wanted to. "What do you think about taking on apprentices?" Marcus asked, the idea forming as he spoke. "We've developed techniques that other engineers could benefit from, and it would be nice to have help with the routine work so we can focus on the complex problems." Caliph looked up from her reading, interest clear in her expression. "Teaching. I hadn't considered that, but it appeals to me. Dragonkin culture places high value on passing knowledge to the next generation. We could establish something between an apprenticeship and a research laboratory. Take on 2 or 3 promising engineers, train them in our methods, collaborate on projects that push the boundaries of what's possible." "I like this idea." Caliph stood, moving to sit beside him on the couch rather than across the room. It was a small thing, but Marcus never took for granted how much had changed between them. A year ago, she would have stayed in her chair. Now, she chose closeness instinctively. "We need to be selective about who we take on. Not just skilled engineers, but ones who can think creatively and work well in a mixed-species environment." They spent the evening planning, their conversation flowing easily between practical concerns and grand visions for what their workshop could become. It felt good to be building something together, not just repairing what others had broken, but creating something new and potentially lasting. A week later, they received an unexpected message from Draken. He was returning to Helios 9, but this time he wasn't alone. Their mother, Matriarch Seraphina of the Bronze Peak clan, was coming with him. "Your mother," Marcus said, trying to keep the nervousness out of his voice. "The matriarch. She's coming here. She wants to meet you properly." Caliph seemed equally unsettled, though she tried to hide it. "In our culture, the matriarch's approval of a bonding is significant. Draken must have told her that we're finally together properly, and she wants to give her blessing. What if she doesn't approve?" Marcus had faced down engine failures and cascade malfunctions without flinching, but the prospect of meeting his dragonkin mother-in-law was genuinely intimidating. "She will." Caliph's voice was firm, but Marcus caught the edge of uncertainty underneath. "You're brilliant, accomplished, and you make me happy. What's not to approve? I'm human, short-lived, fragile, completely lacking in natural weapons or armor. I can't fly, I can't breathe fire, and I probably don't meet any of the traditional criteria for a dragonkin mate." Caliph turned to face him fully, her hands coming up to cup his face. "Marcus, listen to me. My mother is formidable and traditional, yes, but she's not unreasonable. She cares about my happiness above adherence to tradition. And you make me happier than I've ever been. That will matter to her." "Okay." Marcus took a deep breath, tried to calm the anxious flutter in his chest. "Okay, when does she arrive?" 3 days. 3 days. Marcus ran a hand through his hair. "Great. Plenty of time to completely reorganize our entire lives to make a good impression." "Marcus." Caliph's voice was gentle but firm. "We're not reorganizing anything. Our lives are exactly what they should be. We have meaningful work, a comfortable home, and a relationship built on mutual respect and love. If that's not enough for her, then that's her problem, not ours." She was right, of course. Marcus knew she was right, but knowing it intellectually and feeling it emotionally were different things. He spent the next 3 days in a state of low-level anxiety, cleaning their already clean quarters, double-checking their workshop organization, and generally driving himself and Caliph crazy with nervous energy. "You rearranged those tools 3 times already," Caliph observed the day before her mother's arrival. "They're not going to get any more organized." "I know. I'm sorry. I just want everything to be perfect." "Marcus." She set down the part she'd been calibrating and came to stand in front of him, taking his hands in hers. My mother isn't coming to inspect our workshop or judge her housekeeping. She's coming to meet the man her daughter bonded with. The real you, not some carefully curated version designed to impress her. What if the real me isn't impressive enough? Then she's a fool, and I'll tell her so. Calith's tone suggested she wasn't joking, though it won't come to that. Trust me, the day of arrival came too quickly. Marcus and Calith stood in the docking bay as the shuttle from the Dragonkin diplomatic vessel touched down. The hatch opened, and Draken emerged first, his presence as dramatic as Marcus remembered. But it was the figure behind him that commanded attention. Matriarch Seraphina was stunning. She stood even taller than Calith, her scales a brilliant gold that seemed to contain inner light. Her wings, partially extended, showed patterns of crimson and amber that marked her lineage. But it was her eyes that struck Marcus most, ancient and knowing, filled with the kind of wisdom that came from centuries of life experience. Dragonkin could live for 500 years or more. Seraphina, Marcus knew from Calith's stories, was over 3 centuries old. She'd led her clan through wars and peace treaties, had raised 5 children, and seen the rise of the Galactic Collective. And now she was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Mother," Calith said, stepping forward. "Welcome to Helios, 9. Daughter." Seraphina's voice was rich and resonant, carrying harmonics that spoke to her dragon heritage. She embraced Calith, the gesture tender despite her imposing presence. Then she turned to Marcus. "And you must be Marcus Chun, the human who claimed my daughter's bond." Matriarch Seraphina. Marcus bowed, unsure of the proper protocol, but defaulting to respect. "It's an honor to meet you." "Is it?" She moved closer, and Marcus had to fight the instinct to step back. This close, he could see the intricate patterns in her scales, smell the slight tang of ozone that seemed to accompany Dragonkin. "My daughter has been bonded to you for nearly 3 years, yet you only recently acknowledged the relationship. That seems less than honorable." "Mother," Calith said, warning clear in her tone. "No, it's okay." Marcus met Seraphina's eyes, making himself hold that ancient gaze. "You're right. I was slow to understand what Calith meant to me. Slow to accept that what we had was real and not just a practical arrangement. I can't change that. But I can promise you that from the moment I understood, I've been completely committed to her, to our marriage, to building a life together that honors both our cultures." Seraphina studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, unexpectedly, she laughed. The sound was warm and genuine, completely at odds with her intimidating appearance. "Good answer, Marcus Chun. You have courage, facing down an angry matriarch with honesty rather than pretty lies." She turned to Calith. "I see why you bonded with him. He has the kind of stubborn integrity that pairs well with our bloodline." The tension that had been coiling in Marcus's chest released all at once. He glanced at Calith, who looked equally relieved. The tour of their quarters and workshop went better than Marcus had dared hope. Seraphina asked intelligent questions about their work, clearly understanding the technical details despite her primary role being diplomatic rather than engineering. She examined the quantum shielding schematics with particular interest, nodding approval at several of their innovative solutions. "This is excellent work," she said, reviewing their documentation. "You've managed to bridge 2 fundamentally incompatible technologies through creative thinking and solid engineering principles. The collective will want to implement similar systems across multiple species fleets." "We've had some initial inquiries," Calith said, "though we're being selective about which contracts to accept. We're planning to focus on research and development rather than pure implementation work. And training the next generation," Marcus added, explaining their apprenticeship idea. Seraphina's eyes brightened with approval. "Wise. Knowledge hoarded is knowledge wasted. By teaching others, you ensure your innovations continue even after you're gone." She paused, her gaze settling on Marcus with an expression that was almost sympathetic. though that raises a delicate point we should address. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. He knew what was coming. Humans live, on average, 100 years in optimal conditions, Seraphina continued, her tone gentle but direct. Dragonkin live 5 times that. My daughter has bonded with you, which means she's committed to you for her entire life. But you'll be gone long before that life ends. Have you considered what that means for her? Mother, Caliph said sharply. That's not. It's a fair question, Marcus interrupted. He'd thought about this, late at night, when he couldn't sleep, doing the math that he knew Caliph must have done herself. Yes, I considered it. In the best-case scenario, we have 70 or 80 years together. For me, that's a lifetime. For Caliph, it's less than a fifth of her natural span. And that doesn't trouble you? Knowing you're leaving her to face centuries alone. Of course it troubles me. Marcus looked at Caliph, seeing her own distress at this line of conversation. I hate knowing that I can't give her the kind of long partnership that Dragonkin normally have. But I can give her honesty, commitment, and every moment of the time we do have together. And I have to trust that she's made this choice with full understanding of what it means. I have, Caliph said firmly. Mother, I know you mean well, but this isn't your decision to question. Yes, Marcus will die long before I do. Yes, that will be painful. But the alternative, never bonding at all, never having these years with him, that would be worse. Much worse. Seraphina was quiet for a long moment, her ancient eyes moving between them. Then, she nodded slowly. You're right. I apologize for overstepping. It's difficult, as a mother, to accept that my child will face that kind of grief. But I see that you've made your choice with open eyes, and that's what matters. The rest of the visit was more relaxed. Over dinner that evening, Seraphina shared stories of Caliph's childhood, painting a picture of a curious, determined youngling who took apart her first engine at age 12 and rebuilt it better than the original. Marcus contributed stories of their early days on Helios 9, making Caliph groan with embarrassment at some of his more pointed observations about her initial attitude toward human engineering. She told me, very seriously, the human technology was adequate but unrefined, Marcus said, grinning at the memory. This was after I'd just finished repairing a hyperdrive that 3 other mechanics had declared unsalvageable. In my defense, Caliph said, I was correct. Your repair was adequate, but unrefined. It worked, but it wasn't elegant. She spent the next week redesigning my repair to be more efficient. Marcus continued. Cut the power consumption by 15% and improve the response time. I was annoyed at the time, but looking back, that's when I started to really respect her skill. And when did you start to love her? Seraphina asked, the question direct, but not unkind. Marcus considered carefully. There wasn't one moment. It built gradually, over months of working together, living together, learning to read each other's moods and habits. But if I had to pick a moment when I knew, it was during that reactor core repair. Day 3, when we were both exhausted and running on stimulants, and she caught a mistake in my calculations that would have killed us both. She didn't make me feel stupid for missing it. She just fixed it and moved on, like that's what partners do for each other. That is what partners do, Seraphina agreed. Dragonkin bonds are built on that kind of trust. The knowledge that your mate will catch you when you fall, will see your blind spots, will stand beside you when everything else fails. She looked at Caliph with obvious affection. I'm glad you found that, daughter, even if the timeline isn't what I would have chosen for you. Before Seraphina left Helios 9, she made a formal announcement that surprised both Marcus and Caliph. She officially recognized their bond under Dragonkin law, a ceremony that was brief but held weight in Caliph's culture. It meant that Marcus was now considered part of the Bronze Peak clan, with all the rights and responsibilities that entailed. You're Dragonkin now, in the eyes of our people, Draken explained after the ceremony. Not by blood, obviously, but by bond and by my mother's decree. It's rare, but not unprecedented. What does that mean practically? Marcus asked, still processing the weight of what had just happened. It means the clan will support you and Caliph in your endeavors. It means you have access to Dragonkin resources and knowledge. And it means, Draken grinned, that you're expected to attend clan gatherings and put up with my mother's matchmaking attempt for any children you might have. Children, Marcus repeated, the word feeling strange in his mouth. They hadn't talked about that possibility, though obviously it existed. Cross-species reproduction was rare, but not impossible with modern medical technology. Not immediately, Caliph said quickly, reading his expression. We've barely figured out how to be married. Children are a discussion for much later. But not never, Marcus found himself asking, surprising himself with the question. Caliph's eyes widened slightly. Not never. If it's something you want, I think it might be. The realization was settling in as he spoke. Someday, when we're ready, a family of our own. The smile that spread across Caliph's face was radiant. I would like that. Very much. After Seraphina and Draken departed, Marcus and Caliph found themselves alone in their quarters, processing everything that had happened. The recognition ceremony had been emotionally intense, the conversations about mortality and children even more so. Are you okay? Caliph asked, sitting beside him on the couch. My mother can be overwhelming. I'm good, Marcus said, and meant it. Actually, I'm better than good. I know it was uncomfortable at times, but having her approval being recognized by your clan, it matters. It makes this feel more real, more permanent. It is permanent, Caliph said softly. Dragonkin bonds don't break. Ever. You're mine for the rest of your life, Marcus Chun, whether that's 50 years or 100. And I'm yours for all of mine. Marcus pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. Best deal I ever made. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the stars through their viewport. The future stretched ahead of them, full of uncertainty, but also promise. They had work they loved, a partnership that had grown from practical arrangement to genuine devotion, and now the recognition of Caliph's family to support them. 3 years of marriage without intimacy had led to this, a relationship that was deeper and more complete than Marcus had ever imagined possible. They'd done everything backwards, built the foundation before the passion, but somehow that had made it stronger. What are you thinking about? Caliph asked, her voice soft in the quiet. Us. How we got here. How impossibly lucky I am. Marcus tightened his arms around her. 3 years ago, if someone had told me I'd be sitting here, completely in love with the Dragonkin woman I married for tax benefits, I would have thought they were crazy. Only crazy? Caliph's tone was teasing. I would have thought them delusional. That too. Marcus laughed quietly. But here we are, married, bonded, recognized by your clan, and planning to maybe have children someday. We've come a long way from separate quarters and careful distance. We have. Caliph shifted to look at him directly, her amber eyes reflecting the starlight. And I wouldn't change any of it. Not the awkward beginning, not the years of dancing around our feelings, not even the frustration of wanting you and thinking I couldn't have you. All of it led to this, to us as we are now. That makes it worth it. Marcus cupped her face in his hands, marveling as he always did at the warmth of her scales, the intelligence in her eyes, the simple reality of her presence in his life. I love you, more than I thought it was possible to love someone. I love you too, she replied. And then she kissed him with a tenderness that still, after everything, made his heart race. They made love that night with a new depth of understanding, the recognition ceremony adding weight to what was already meaningful. This wasn't just physical intimacy. It was confirmation of the bond they'd built, the promises they'd made, the future they were creating together. Afterward, lying tangled together in the darkness, Marcus found himself thinking about what Seraphina had said about mortality. The thought of leaving Caliph alone for centuries after his death was painful, but dwelling on it seemed like a waste of the time they did have. Promise me something, he said into the quiet. Anything. When I'm gone, eventually, don't spend the rest of your life alone. I know Dragonkin bond for life, but that's a long time to be by yourself. If you find someone who makes you happy, someone who respects what we had, but offers something new, take that chance. Caliph was silent for so long that Marcus thought she might have fallen asleep. Then she spoke, her voice thick with emotion. That's very generous and very painful to think about. I know, but I need to say it. I love you too much to want you to be lonely for centuries because of me. She pulled him closer, her wing settling over them both like a shield against the universe. We have decades before we need to worry about that. Let's focus on the time we have rather than the time we won't. Deal. Marcus pressed a kiss to her chest, right above her heart. Speaking of which, what do you think about starting those apprenticeship interviews next week? Caliph laughed, the sound surprised and warm. You want to talk about business now? Why not? We're lying here naked and bonded and recognized by a 300-year-old matriarch. Seems like a good time to plan our professional future. You're ridiculous. You love me anyway. I do, Caliph agreed, and Marcus could hear the smile in her voice. Against all logic and reason, I absolutely do. They talked late into the night, their conversation flowing easily between the personal and professional, the serious and silly. It was comfortable in a way that only came from genuine partnership, from knowing someone well enough that even silence felt like communication. 3 years of marriage without intimacy had taught them patience. Now they were learning passion, the kind that came from choosing each other again and again from building something real out of what had started as convenience. And Marcus wouldn't have wanted it any other way. 5 years after their marriage began, Marcus stood in their expanded workshop watching 3 apprentices work on a complex propulsion system redesign. The youngest, a human woman named Sarah, was arguing technical points with their Vethian apprentice, while the third, a dragonkin named Torch who'd been recommended by Draken himself, worked with focused intensity on a particularly delicate calibration. Sarah, you're missing the resonance factor, Caliph called from across the workshop, not looking up from her own terminal. Check your harmonics before you finalize that configuration. But the math works out, Sarah protested, then paused to review her calculations. Oh, yeah, you're right. How did you catch that from all the way over there? Practice, Caliph replied with a slight smile that meant she was pleased. And years of catching Marcus making similar mistakes. Hey, Marcus said, moving to examine Sarah's work. I don't make mistakes. I create learning opportunities. The apprentices laughed, comfortable enough with both of them now to appreciate the banter. It had taken 6 months to find the right candidates, individuals who had both technical skill and the temperament to work in their unconventional setup. But the effort had been worth it. The workshop hummed with productive energy, and Marcus found genuine satisfaction in teaching what he and Caliph had learned. Marcus, can you look at this? Torch called out, his young voice still carrying the harmonics of dragon speech. At 15 years old, he was barely an adolescent by dragonkin standards, but he showed remarkable aptitude for engineering. The phase variance keeps drifting outside acceptable parameters. Marcus joined him at the workbench, examining the readings. You're fighting the drift instead of accommodating it. See here? The system wants to oscillate naturally. Instead of dampening it completely, design your configuration to work within that oscillation. Work with the system instead of against it, Torch murmured, his claws already moving across the interface to implement changes. Master Caliph says you think like this about all problems. Master Caliph is generous with her praise, Marcus said, though warmth spread through his chest at the comment. But she's not wrong. The best engineering recognizes that some things can't be forced. You have to understand what the system wants to do naturally and build around that. The comm unit chimed, and Caliph's voice came through. Marcus, we have a visitor. Bay 3. The tone of her voice suggested this wasn't a routine visit. Marcus handed Torch back his project and made his way to the bay, where he found Caliph standing with a woman in Terran Defense Fleet uniform. Not Lieutenant Reeves, who occasionally stopped by when he was on the station, but someone Marcus didn't recognize. Her insignia marked her as a captain, and her bearing suggested this was official business. Marcus Chunt, the captain, extended her hand. Captain Elizabeth Park, I'm here on behalf of Fleet Command with a proposition. They moved to the office area of the workshop, away from the apprentice's curious ears. Captain Park declined refreshment and got straight to the point, which Marcus appreciated. The quantum shielding system you developed has been revolutionary for our stealth capabilities. But we've encountered a new problem. She pulled up a holographic display showing a ship's sensor readings. 3 months ago, one of our frigates encountered an unknown vessel in deep space. It matched our speed and heading for 6 hours before finally breaking off. Our quantum shielding was active the entire time, yet the vessel tracked us perfectly. Marcus leaned forward, studying the data with growing interest. Someone's developed a countermeasure. That's our assessment. We need you to figure out how they're doing it and develop a solution. Hart's expression was serious. This isn't just about maintaining our tactical advantage. If hostile forces can track our stealth ships, it fundamentally changes the security situation in human space. What makes you think we can solve this? Caliph asked. We designed a shielding system, but countermeasures could use completely different technology. Because you're the best, and because this situation requires creative thinking, not just technical expertise. You've proven you can bridge different technological paradigms. We need that ability now. Marcus exchanged a glance with Caliph, seeing his own interest reflected in her eyes. This was exactly the kind of challenge they'd hoped for when they decided to focus on research and development. We need full access to the sensor data, the quantum shielding specifications, and any intelligence on the unknown vessel. You'll have it, but there's one condition. Hart's expression became more serious. This work needs to be done at a secure facility. Not here on Helios 9. We're talking about a small research station, highly classified, with only essential personnel. It would mean relocating for at least a year, possibly longer. The apprentices, Marcus said immediately. We can't just abandon their training. Bring them. We've reviewed their files. All 3 have passed security clearances for lower-level classified work. This would be an exceptional opportunity for their development. Park must have anticipated this objection. The facility has living quarters designed for extended research teams. You'd have your own private space, separate from the communal areas. Calith's tail swished, a sign she was thinking through implications. What kind of timeline are we looking at? We need you there within 2 weeks. The unknown vessel hasn't been seen again, but we have to assume it's only a matter of time before we have another encounter. We need solutions before that happens. After Park left, Marcus and Caliph sat together in their office, weighing the decision. It was a significant commitment, uprooting their lives again for work that might take years. But it was also exactly what they'd been hoping for, a chance to push the boundaries of what was possible to solve problems that mattered. What do you think? Marcus asked. I think we should do it. Calith's voice was certain. This is important work, and it's the kind of challenge we both need. We've been comfortable here, maybe too comfortable. This would push us again. The apprentices might not want to come. It's a big ask. Then we give them the choice. But I suspect they'll jump at the opportunity. When else will they get to work on classified research with full access to cutting-edge technology? Caliph was right. When they presented the opportunity to Sarah, Torch, and their Vithian apprentice Kelvin, all 3 agreed immediately. The excitement in their eyes reminded Marcus of his younger self, hungry for challenges and new experiences. The research station, designated Aurora 7, hung in deep space 3 jumps from the nearest inhabited system. It was small by station standards, designed for a population of no more than 50, but what it lacked in size it made up for in sophisticated equipment. The quantum research laboratory alone was better equipped than most university facilities. Their living quarters were spacious, a suite that included a bedroom, living area, and small kitchen. The apprentices had their own shared quarters nearby, close enough for easy supervision, but far enough to give everyone privacy. This is much nicer than I expected, Caliph said, examining the space with approval. Military facilities usually prioritize function over comfort. They're trying to keep us happy, Marcus observed, which suggests they're expecting this to be a long project and want to minimize reasons for us to leave. The first month at Aurora 7 was spent in intensive study of the sensor data from the unknown vessel encounter. Marcus and Caliph worked long hours, pulling apart every reading, every anomaly, trying to understand how someone had managed to track a ship that should have been effectively invisible. "It's not conventional sensors," Caliph said one evening, projecting the data onto their quarters display. They developed a habit of continuing work discussions after hours, finding that some of their best insights came during these relaxed conversations. The tracking was too precise, too consistent. They weren't looking for the ship directly. So what were they looking for? Marcus studied the display, looking for patterns. The quantum field itself creates probability waves, but those should be undetectable at range. Unless you're not detecting the waves themselves, but their effects on spacetime. Caliph's eyes brightened with the excitement of a new theory forming. Quantum fields at this magnitude create small gravitational distortions, incredibly subtle, but measurable with the right equipment. Marcus felt the familiar thrill of insight clicking into place. They're tracking the gravitational signature. That's brilliant. Horrifying, but brilliant. And nearly impossible to counter, Caliph added. You can't eliminate gravity without eliminating the ship itself. We need to find a way to mask the gravitational signature without interfering with the quantum shielding. They worked on the problem for 3 more months, testing theories and running simulations. The apprentices contributed ideas, some naive, but occasionally insightful. It was Torch who suggested looking at how black holes bent space-time, wondering if they could create a similar distortion field to confuse gravitational sensors. The energy requirements would be massive, Sarah pointed out, running quick calculations. We need the output of a small star to generate that kind of field. Not if we do it in pulses, Marcus said, the idea forming even as he spoke. Brief moments of intense field generation, time to create false signatures. Make it look like there are multiple ships moving in different directions. Caliph was already working through the math on her terminal. Possible. Difficult, but possible. We need to integrate it with the quantum shielding system, create a harmonized field that combines both probability distortion and gravitational confusion. The solution they developed over the following months was elegant in its complexity. Instead of trying to hide the gravitational signature, they amplified and scattered it, creating a field of false positives that would make tracking any single ship nearly impossible. Combined with the existing quantum shielding, it would make stealth frigates effectively invisible to any known detection method. Testing the system required coordination with Fleet Command and the construction of specialized equipment. By the time they were ready for the first full-scale test, more than a year had passed at Aurora 7. The apprentices had grown in skill and confidence, taking on increasingly complex aspects of the project. Torch, in particular, had proven to have an intuitive grasp of field dynamics that rivaled even Caliph's formal training. The test took place in a remote section of space, with 3 stealth frigates equipped with a new system and a dozen different sensor platforms trying to track them. Marcus and Caliph watched from the Aurora 7 control center, tension coiling in both of them as the frigates activated their enhanced shielding. Quantum fields stable, reported the technician monitoring the test. Gravitational distortion pattern engaged. We're reading multiple signatures across a volume of space approximately 1 million cubic kilometers. On the display, the sensor platforms showed confusion, their readouts flickering between dozens of potential ship locations. The actual frigates were invisible among the noise, their true positions unknowable from the sensor data. It's working, Sarah breathed from her position at one of the monitoring stations. They've completely disappeared. The test ran for 6 hours, with the frigates performing various maneuvers while the sensor platforms tried desperately to maintain tracking solutions. By the end, Fleet Command was satisfied. The system worked, and worked well. Captain Park, who'd overseen the testing remotely, contacted them directly afterward. Excellent work. Fleet Command wants to move forward with immediate implementation across all stealth vessels. We're talking about a 2-year rollout, minimum. They want you to oversee the entire program. Marcus felt Caliph stiffen beside him. 2 more years. 2 years of living on Aurora. 7. Away from Helios. 9. Away from the life they'd built there. We need to discuss this, Marcus told Park. Give us 48 hours. After the connection ended, they sat together in the quiet of the control center, the displays still showing the test data. The apprentices had returned to their quarters, excited and exhausted, leaving Marcus and Caliph alone. 2 more years, Caliph said quietly. Minimum. I know. Marcus took her hand, threading their fingers together. What do you want to do? I want to go home. The admission came out soft, but certain. The work here has been incredible, and I'm proud of what we've accomplished. But I miss Helios 9. I miss our workshop, our quarters, the life we built there. I'm ready to be done with long-term military contracts. Relief flooded through Marcus. I feel the same way. This has been amazing, but I'm ready to go back to choosing our own projects, working on our own timeline. So we tell them no. We tell them we'll train a team to implement the system that will be available for consultation, but we're not signing on for another 2 years of military work. Marcus squeezed her hand. We've given them 2 revolutionary systems. That's enough. Time to get back to our own life. Fleet Command wasn't happy with their decision, but they accepted it. Marcus and Caliph spent 3 months training a team of engineers to implement the enhanced shielding system, documenting every aspect of the technology in exhaustive detail. The apprentices were offered positions on the implementation team, with generous salaries and the prestige of working on classified military projects. Sarah and Kelvin accepted, ready for the challenge and the opportunity. But Torch surprised them all by declining. I want to keep learning from you, he told them privately. The military work is exciting, but I'd rather work on civilian projects where we can push boundaries without security restrictions. If you'll have me, I'd like to continue my apprenticeship on Helios 9. Marcus looked at Caliph, seeing his own pleased surprise reflected in her expression. We'd be honored to continue training you, Caliph told Torch. You've become an exceptional engineer, and we're proud of the work you've done here. The return to Helios 9 felt like coming home in the truest sense. Their quarters had been maintained, their workshop waiting, but everything felt slightly different now. They'd been changed by their time away, shaped by the challenges they'd faced and overcome. 7 years, Marcus said one evening, sitting with Caliph in their favorite spot by the viewport. 7 years since we got married for tax benefits and housing priority. Best bureaucratic decision I ever made, Caliph replied, her tail curling around his waist in a gesture that had become instinctive between them. They'd achieved so much in those 7 years. Revolutionary technology that was changing how humanity defended itself in space. A reputation as 2 of the finest engineers in known space. A thriving apprenticeship program that was training the next generation. But more than any of that, they'd built something that mattered to Marcus more than any professional achievement. A marriage that had transformed from practical arrangement to genuine partnership to deep, abiding love. I want to show you something, Caliph said, standing and extending her hand. I've been working on a project while you were busy with the final documentation for Fleet Command. She led him to a section of their quarters he'd noticed she'd been keeping closed off. When she opened the door, Marcus found himself looking at a room that had been completely transformed. It was painted in warm colors, with furniture size for both human and dragonkin use. On one wall hung a mobile with stars and planets. On another, shelves waited empty but ready to be filled. A nursery, Marcus breathed, understanding flooding through him. I know he said someday, and maybe that's still not now, Caliph said, her voice carrying a note of nervousness he rarely heard. But I wanted you to know I'm ready. When you are. If you are. Marcus moved to her, pulling her into an embrace. I'm ready. I've been ready for a while. I just didn't know how to bring it up. Really? The hope in her voice made his chest tight. Really? I love our life, our work, our partnership. But I'd love to share all of that with a family. To teach our child the things we've learned. To watch them grow up understanding both human and dragonkin culture. Caliph held him tighter, and Marcus felt wetness on his shoulder that suggested she was crying. Dragons didn't cry easily. Tears were precious to them, reserved for moments of profound emotion. "I love you," she said, her voice thick. "I've loved you since day 47 of that reactor repair, and every day since it's just made it deeper. You've given me everything I didn't know I needed. Partnership, purpose, home. And now you're giving me this too. We're giving each other this," Marcus corrected gently. "Everything we've built, we built together. That's how it's always been with us." Starting a family proved more complicated than either of them anticipated. Cross-species conception required medical assistance, genetic counseling, and extensive health monitoring. The process took nearly 2 years, with setbacks and disappointments along the way. But Marcus and Caliph faced it together, supporting each other through the frustrations and celebrating the small victories. When Caliph finally confirmed she was pregnant, they both cried. Even Torch, who'd become like a younger brother to both of them, got misty-eyed when they told him. "You're going to be incredible parents," he said with complete certainty. "This child is going to grow up understanding things most people never learn: how to bridge different worlds, how to find creative solutions, how to build something real through patience and partnership." The pregnancy lasted 18 months, typical for dragonkin carrying hybrid offspring. Marcus worried constantly, despite the medical team's assurances that everything was progressing normally. Caliph bore his hovering with patient amusement, only occasionally needing to remind him that she was perfectly capable of continuing to work. Their daughter was born on a spring morning by station time, emerging into the world with her mother's scales and her father's dark eyes. She was tiny and perfect, and when a medical team placed her in Marcus's arm for the first time, he felt something in his chest crack open with love, so fierce it was almost painful. "She's beautiful," he whispered, unable to look away from the small face. "She is," Caliph agreed from the medical bed, exhausted but radiant. "What should we call her?" They debated names for months, trying to find something that honored both their cultures. In the end, they chose Lyra, a name that existed in both human and dragonkin languages, meaning light in one and brave-hearted in the other. Lyrachin grew up in the workshop, learning to crawl among circuit boards and taking her first steps while holding onto a workbench. She showed an early fascination with how things worked, taking apart her toys with focused intensity and then demanding help putting them back together. By the time she was 3 years old, she could identify basic tools and loved nothing more than helping her parents with their projects. "She's going to be brilliant," Torch observed one afternoon, watching Lyra explain to him very seriously why his circuit diagram wouldn't work. At 8 years old, she was already showing signs of inheriting both her parents' engineering aptitude and her mother's dragonkin spatial reasoning. "She's going to be whatever she wants to be," Marcus said, feeling the familiar surge of fierce protectiveness. "Engineer, artist, explorer, anything. We're just here to support her." But privately, he suspected Torch was right. Lyra had the same hunger for understanding that had driven both him and Caliph, the need to take things apart and figure out how they worked and how they could be made better. Marcus was 45 when they celebrated their 15th wedding anniversary. Caliph organized a small gathering with Torch, a few close colleagues, and Draken, who made the journey from Dragonkin space specifically for the occasion. Lyra, now 7 years old, helped prepare the meal, her enthusiasm greater than her actual cooking skill. 15 years, Draken said, raising his glass in a toast. "I remember thinking you two were crazy, entering into a marriage of convenience and pretending it would stay that way. I'm glad to have been proven wrong." "To being proven wrong," Marcus agreed, clinking his glass against Draken's. His eyes found Caliph across the room, watching her laugh at something Torch was saying while keeping one eye on Lyra, who was attempting to serve dessert. "Best mistake we ever made." Later, after their guests had left and Lyra was tucked into bed, Marcus and Caliph sat together in their favorite spot by the viewport. The years had left their marks, silver in Marcus's hair now, small scars on both of them from various workshop accidents, the comfortable weight that came from building a life together. Do you ever think about that first day? Marcus asked, when we signed a marriage contract for tax benefits. Sometimes, Caliph leaned against him, her wings settling over his shoulders in a gesture that still made him feel safe and loved. I thought I was being so practical, so clever, using human bureaucracy to my advantage while maintaining careful emotional distance. How'd that work out for you? Terribly. I fell completely in love with you and spent 2 years trying to pretend I hadn't. She pressed a kiss to his temple. Best failure of my life. Mine too. Marcus thought about everything they'd built, the innovations, the reputation, the apprentices they'd trained, the daughter they were raising. But more than any of that, he thought about the partnership they'd forged, the way they'd learned to work together and live together and love each other with increasing depth over 15 years. You know what the best part is? What? We're still figuring it out, still learning each other, still growing together. 15 years, and it still feels like we're at the beginning of something. That's because dragonkin bonds don't have endings, only chapters. Caliph's voice was soft, contemplative. This is just our second chapter. We have so many more ahead of us. Marcus thought about that, about the years that stretched ahead, fewer for him than for her, but still full of possibility. They'd build more things, solve more problems, watch Lyra grow into whoever she would become. They'd keep learning, keep growing, keep choosing each other day after day. I love you, he said simply, the words carrying the weight of 15 years of meaning. I love you too, Caliph replied. My mate, my partner, my perfectly stubborn human mechanic who insisted on doing everything the hard way, including falling in love with me. Best decision I ever made. Second best, she corrected with gentle humor. The best was agreeing to marry me for tax benefits in the first place. Marcus laughed, the sound warm and content. She was right. Everything good in his life traced back to that practical decision, that bureaucratic arrangement that had seemed so straightforward at the time. 3 years of marriage without intimacy had led to this. 15 years of building something real, something lasting, something that transcended the simple categories of human or dragonkin, practical or romantic, planned or spontaneous. They'd done it all backwards, and somehow that had made it right. As they sat together watching the stars, Marcus felt the deep satisfaction of a life well lived and still unfolding. They'd won more than they'd ever known they were competing for, found more than they'd ever known they were seeking. And the best part? They'd done it together, one careful, imperfect, absolutely perfect step at a time.